All right. Hey, Matt. Thanks a lot for being here. I'm super excited to learn more about Cogensus. If you had to give like a 2 to 3 minute elevator pitch to an investor on what Cogensus actually is, what would that be?
Sure. Well, it's a pleasure to meet you, Gustavo. So, Cogensus is pretty simply put in three things. We create effectively a journal in which seniors can use artificial intelligence to help them record their memories and effectively vent and just talk about how they're doing on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. As we collect those records and engage in kind of mental stimulation with the senior, doctors get extracted insights from our tool around the ideas of verbal, mental, and mood insights. So those look at things about memory, how you're talking, when you're talking, what you're saying, and how you're doing on a daily basis. And then the last part is one of our core tenets about the platform is to extend social community. So we actually allow family members to create a closed loop ecosystem with their senior or patient, if you will, and then exchange those memories that they're talking about and create textual and pictorial memoirs so they can capture and preserve family history. And all of this is built around the auspice of effectively combating loneliness and social isolation in the elderly. So that's what we do.
Okay, awesome. Well, I want to break down a lot of what you said there. Let's start with the problem, which is kind of what you mentioned at the end, right? This idea of loneliness and cognitive decline in the older population. So, I mean, what is this problem? Has it been getting worse by the years? Why is this something that we want to address?
Sure, yeah. So the world has been becoming a more lonely place ever since the emergence of social media. Social media kind of paradoxically created a situation where we know a lot more about each other, but because we know so much, we become very isolated internally. And that has magnified across three different factors, particularly for the elderly. So, first and foremost, we have a very top heavy population worldwide. So, many countries around the world have a rapidly aging core group, and the birth rates in parallel have not grown to accompany and support that aging cohort. So, what that means is you have a lot of seniors and elderly people across the world getting a lower standard of care. And they're also becoming more isolated both mentally and physically because they just don't have as many family members or caregivers working around them. So the problem with that is not only is that going to become a burden from a monetary aspect on societies, but it's also a burden on the medical systems, right? We just don't have enough nurses or doctors to care for these people. And that's going to get worse over the next 30 to 40 years to an extreme degree. I believe there's a stat that says in 2030, one in every six people in the US is going to be over 65. And I think it's like by 2050, I think one in every 10 people will be over 60 or something of that nature. The takeaway is it's very large. And so the problem with loneliness and particularly social isolation, and another term used for one of the things we look at is called social connectedness. So social connectedness is actually a term which is categorized under social determinants of health. And social determinants of health are a growing field within the medical world of things that can contribute to progression of symptoms that are not necessarily core medical factors. They're situational life factors. So loneliness, a lack of social connectedness, and social isolation increase the risk of about 5 to 6 different cognitive and physical diseases. So they found that there people who are socially disconnected have a higher incidence of cardiac events. Additionally, people are more at risk for developing Alzheimer's, dementia, and just general cognitive decline, the less stimulation they get from a social aspect. And then all those things get worse the more lonely you are and the older you are, it becomes more of a risk factor. So that's why we're going after it. We think it's a real problem for the world.
Got it. So kind of just to break it down here,
Mm.
the US is getting older,
Yes.
and because of social media, we're more isolated. So a lot of those older people that are more at risk of cognitive decline are also more isolated. So that's kind of just a snowball running downhill, and they're more likely to get the cognitive decline.
Well, so it's mostly, right? So there's two factors, not just social media. The simple fact is we live in a much more go, go, go world, right? And so there's a whole host of factors that influence this, and they would probably be categorized under social determinants of health. But things are more expensive. Broadly, we all recognize that, right? So that means that family members traditionally that would have a little extra time to spend with their aging relatives might be working more. So there's less time for them to go actually physically interact with them, right? In parallel, they're being drawn into population centers across the world, right? And family members, aged ones, might live out away from the city. So it's harder to get to them, right? In proxy of that, we are all at risk for loneliness and social isolation. But the problem is for seniors in particular, they're already aging, right? And so when you age, you naturally are at risk for different conditions. But loneliness compounding those things makes you far more likely to develop those symptoms. And if you do, it can accelerate the decline of those symptoms. So it's multi-factor. Social media was just kind of the initial kickoff. But now we're in a societal situation where we're just not really well equipped to deal with particularly a very large aging cohort. And so to that point too, a lot of medical institutions are built around what I would call not emergent symptoms, it's interventions, right? So a senior might go to a hospital for a particular symptom, and the hospital wants to get you in and get you out, right? They want to treat you, keep you alive, and move you on to make room for other people. They're not designed necessarily to keep an ongoing, monitor of how you're doing. So you might be steadily getting worse, but the only time they see you is when you have a trigger event. And so that is all a much bigger problem. But to your point, those are the factors, right? We have a very large aging cohort, and we're just not equipped to deal with them right now. And they're at risk for additional symptom development. So,
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting too, because I feel like 10 years ago, social isolation wasn't really something that we talked about as much, but now it really is. Is
correct.
this something that you've noticed doctors are also kind of talking about a lot and are on top of their mind when it comes to the aging population?
So yes, it has been. So I would say it's a growing trend, right? We are seeing many more academic and medical institutions considering and talking about things like social determinants of health, loneliness, social isolation. They were aware of these factors before, but now they're starting to consider them as far as like, do these things influence, right? Or are these things we should be watching for? To the point where now they are actually considering those as pieces of data to collect on a patient over time, right? And that's where we are trying to make our imprint. But I can tell you that both at Harvard and UCLA, currently there are initiatives to study loneliness. So there's this idea of that we need to better categorize what loneliness means to people. And so, yes, to your point.
Totally. Yeah, well, that kind of seems to me that the consumer here, there are kind of three consumers, right? The elderly person,
Mhm.
their doctor, and then their family. So let's like talk a little bit about how Congensus actually helps each of those categories, right? Like starting with the patient, what's really in it for the patient?
Sure. So for the patients, it's pretty straightforward, right? There's three things that we help a patient with. First and foremost, as you age, you want to pass on your life learnings. That's just a given, right? People want to know they mattered. And so it's very hard to do that in a one point in time moment, right? We know the old trope of people coming in and sitting down with grandma with a video camera and saying, "Okay, grandma, tell me about your life." Right? How do you compile 60, 70 years of human existence into an hour on a camera? It's hard. So, when we started this company, I thought there was a better way of doing it. And a better way of doing it is you often have these like day by day stories that just occur when you're living your life, right? It's like, oh, this thing I saw reminds me of this story. So this gives seniors, one, an ability to pass on their learnings, legacy, and memory to their family. That's one, right? The second part of that is there are a number of unfortunate cases where seniors are physically isolated from people, socially isolated, or just generally want more people to talk to or a way to vent, right? It's very common, especially when you start to get, dementia, Alzheimer's, anything like that. You might say the same thing 32 times and we can only hear the same thing 32 times as another person, right? So this also provides a tool for them to effectively work through things themselves with effectively a level of AI feedback, right? We're not trying to replace doctors in any context, right? Our AI tooling is designed to effectively give you a conversant personality that you could talk to, but that personality is not going to be necessarily recommending you do things differently, right? It's going to give you that feedback so you feel like you're engaging with someone and they're listening attentively, but they're not trying to tell you to do things different, right? Or that's not what we're trying to do. So that's two, right? Gives them a venting tool, gives them a way to talk to someone or something. And then the last part is effectively it gives them a way to better converse with their medical providers in a way that's much more organic and over time basis than just they go in and the doctor goes, "How are your symptoms doing? Have they gotten better?" You don't know, right? You're a 70-year-old person who might be, starting to show signs of dementia, and they're asking you to recount 6 months of progress or decline in 20 minutes. That's really hard. And so that's a better way. So our hope is that over time they get better care by being able to share this tool, right? So
Yeah,
that's one.
super quick. Yeah, on that point, just to make sure I'm getting it right, is it somewhat of like a journaling tool for the elderly that they can use to just write whatever's on top of their heads?
So they don't write anything; they speak. So
Okay.
this is all done via conversation. So the tool we're building is going to function very similar to the way we're talking, right? You've asked me an open-ended question. I'm gonna respond, right? But if we were friends, right? I could simply call you one day and go, "Gustavo, I'm really pissed about this thing," right? I'm gonna just vent to you. I don't want an answer. I don't want you to tell me anything different. I just want to complain, right? It's that, right? So it's not a structured journal tool because that's really hard. People have a hard time journaling, right? But it's very easy to just complain to someone or something, right? And we give that feedback so you don't feel like you're complaining to a dead wall, right? That's not useful. So that's that first part.
But does the AI respond to
Yes.
the person that's venting?
Yes. So it's an AI friend, but the difference between our tool and a lot of other tools that are either, starting to enter the market or have announced themselves or even in market is we are not trying to replace any people in the equation. We're trying to create a system that supplements and increases social cohesion amongst the parties, right? That's the big difference. Because we recognize that there's a very negative thing that can happen when you form an attachment to an artificial being, right? We'll call it that for lack of a better, an artificial tool, right? That's not healthy for anyone. It's not healthy for the person. It's not healthy for the family. It's not healthy for anyone. So we don't want that. But we do want to give them an ability to talk to someone and get the feedback they need, like a normal way, right? That's it.
Yeah. Out of curiosity here, how far is the AI from being able to take whatever an elderly person might say, understand that well, and then kind of have a conversation with the elderly person?
I think we're mostly there, honestly. I would say the biggest issue with AI today is that a lot of AI tools, particularly generative AI, when I say AI, I'm talking about that. There's other forms of it, but generative AI in particular goes off the rails, can go off the rails very easily, right? So there's a lot of safeguards that have to be put in place, right? So for example, we make use of what I'll call unstructured and structured conversation paths. If someone says a certain phrase, for example, like, you know, I'm going to harm myself, we don't allow open tooling and conversation on that nature, right? Because that's very dangerous. So our entire platform is aired on the side of conservative safety and efficacy, right? That's where we're going for. A lot of the consumer grade tools could have a conversation with you and I, could have a conversation with the elderly. They could do it, right? It won't be perfectly organic, but it's good enough. But the problem is it says stuff and it's not designed to have your best interest in mind, right? At all. So I would say to your point, we could have a conversation with AI today, but is it going to be super fruitful? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on the engine itself.
Yeah, totally. I want to get a little bit more into this like safety aspect of it a little later, but let's go back into what's in it for doctors, right? So the elderly person is speaking with the AI. The AI is kind of synthesizing all this information, and then it can produce somewhat of a report for their physician.
Yes.
How,
So
how does that work? Like the data collection and then also the connection with the physician.
yeah, so one of the things that separates our platform amongst other platforms is we have a very robust data fabric underneath. In some cases, I would say that ours is an analytics tool with some extra functionality put into it, right? Like our overall vision is one of which we can gain richer analytics and give them to providers, right? That's one. So the way it works is you have this conversation. It gets stored as effectively like a Zoom transcript, right? On the back end of that, we're looking for a whole bunch of subjective and objective things. So subjective could mean we asked you a story last week and you told me A, B, C, and D. I ask you the same story next week and you tell me C, D, E, E, F, G. Totally different. It's the same story though. So we then ask ourselves on the back end, is this person just answering differently or did they truly misremember it? Right? That becomes what I call a point, right? A point of interest. And so there's those kind of things, right? Those are subjective. Objective are if someone says, "I'm feeling sad," and they say that 10 days in a row. We flag that record and automatically highlight that as like, this is a point of concern, right? And we can call it that insight. But the journals, the entries can be looked at from the doctor either per entry basis. We auto tag certain ones, for example, like, is there a risk here? Do we think there's a risk? Like we'll let you make the call. Or we actually have graphical analytics. So they will actually be able to go and say, okay, give for the month of June, select all these entries, give me the report, right? And that report will give them, doctors get access to this where none of the other parties do. So we reserve that insight for the doctors or caregivers. So you could be a licensed nurse working in a senior care facility and you could get that insight, right? You have to be a licensed medical professional, but we're not making it available to patients because we want to avoid a WebMD situation where you start to try to self-diagnose. That's like not useful. So they'll get effectively pictorial and numerical and, textual exports on what we think and why. And so then they can kind of sort through those things.
Yeah. So is this a system that a physician or a nurse would go to the patient and say, "Hey, I think you should get it on Cogensus."
Yes.
On their end, Cogensus will kind of just target that loneliness aspect of it, but then on the physician end, they'll be able to see all this data that's coming in?
Yeah, for the most part, our model is a business to business model. So our goal is not to sell direct to the consumer for the purposes that I personally believe that there are certain populations that are at risk for manipulation. And certainly an elderly person that might be experiencing some level of mental decline, we don't want to get anywhere near that branding, right? That's not our goal. So we are positioning ourselves particularly as a robust and trustworthy tool because that's what we are. And so we go to the doctors. The doctors go, I have these 10 patients, right? I'm concerned about these two. Maybe one of them just lost their spouse and their family is not local, or maybe this person developed, a terminal illness of some sort. It doesn't have to be cognitive. A lot of terminal illnesses have comorbidity for depression and cognitive decline. Like these are common. And so they could say, I want you to try this tool for us, right? And they would assign the license to the patient. They would set it up with them. And then on the back end, the doctor has effectively a single console to manage all their patients. And then the user end, they just have their own, right? And they have their own loop, so to speak. So that's how that works.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. And then the family, how does the family play a role into this?
So the family is effectively they're observers to the process, right? So the idea being is that in order to facilitate a deeper level of communication inter-family, the main we'll call our core user or anchor user is the elderly person. They are putting out information, right? These stories or these records, and family members can get view access to their profile in regards to the memories and the transcripts. However, they can only get that if the elderly person gives them the ability to see it. So we are going to create effectively a secret code, for lack of a better word, a key, and they have to give that to the family member of choice, right? That person then can log into the system and view these things. And in version, we'll call it version 1.2, right? They will actually be able to create joint memories. So they'll be able to weigh in on these pictorial or textual outputs and create unified family histories, which I think is really cool. And so that's how that works. But they are in a what I call closed loop private ecosystem. So if you were to see imagine a graphic in your head, anchor user sits up top, and then you have a chart that has effectively dotted lines, right, to each of the other family units members that are there. And it says what relevance they are, like mother, daughter, sister, whatever. And those, when they share those memories, those are the only people that ever get them, right? They don't go social. It's just for security purposes, we keep it very tight. And then if at some point that core user passes away, because we all will one day, all those things get compiled and handed off to the family for data preservation. So they actually get a record, and that can be used both for purposes of remembrance of someone, or when you're actually settling affairs, you could use it to record things about like, okay, there's this bank account and it's over here, it's this data and blah, blah, blah. That's privatized for the family only, right? Doctor can't see that. But they could then reference that and say, oh, because we're, as I said, we've all dealt with that. And settling someone's affairs, if there's an untimely death or even just an expected one, it's a pain in the butt to settle all those affairs, right? So that's how
Yeah.
that works.
Cool. So the memories and the private information stays with the patient and the family, but then the data that's relevant to like the loneliness and the physician only goes to the physician.
Correct.
And does the AI decide what, like, does it distinguish these two?
So we have privacy and permission set up obviously across the app. So you, for example, there's different grades of privacy that the user can set, or it auto sets it. So for example, if you in one record mention your bank account and you list it out, the system recognizes a series of characters and goes, oh, that's a bank account. And so it automatically makes the record private for the user only. And then they have to go in and allow it to the different parties, right? So we have a whole bunch of little like safeguards like that.
Would that usually go to the patient? Does the elderly patient would have to click, oh, allow for this information to go somewhere
Correct.
else? Okay.
Yeah, and if for example a patient, so there's a world in which maybe you just want to use the tool to vent about your personal issues, and you don't want your doctor or the family members to see the record. The insights will still be extracted. Okay, the insights happen on the back end, and the insights are what I'll call it's a large scale data exercise. So we're not looking for a lot of specifics, as in like the story specifically, like this sentence. We're looking for patterns, right? Negative patterns or positive patterns. And so if you say, oh, I'm going to tell this story about this time I suffered some personal trauma, because a lot of people have stuff happen to them, right? And they don't necessarily want to tell their doctor. And they also don't want necessarily their family to know, right? They just want to vent or work it out. They can set that as private to themselves only. So there's private for them, there's private for them and their doctors, there's private for them and their families, and then there's everybody. So those are the different grades, right? And you could start a record and say, make this a private record, and the system will automatically capture that record as a private one. So that's how we kind of sort it.
Got it. So on that, right, will this tool also be used for people with kind of like late stage dementia?
It could eventually.
Okay.
So we are ultimately designing it for a long-term horizon of being able to support people across all spectrums of, I'll call it cognitive decline. But there's additional considerations that have to go into each phase, right? So someone that has additional symptoms, right, or advanced symptoms, they might have trouble just brushing their teeth, right? And so having to work this tool in parallel might not be the best thing in the way we have it structured right now. However, we are creating what we call an assisted journey. So they could use that tool in parity with their nurse or their sibling or whoever's helping them, right? So they will ultimately do it because it does gain a lot of the same value. Like particularly, let's say someone has advanced dementia, right? Most of the time they're not lucid, or I should say that in every individuals, but if you're not lucid most of the time, you might have moments of lucidity, right? Where in those moments you're like, okay, I remember who I am. I want to talk about stuff. This would be a perfect thing to have with you. And in those moments you capture them, right? And then we can filter away the other stuff that's just a repeat, right? That is very useful to families and doctors. So yes, is the long-term view. We're just sorting for how we do that in the best way.
Yeah. I mean, could it happen that because these patients have dementia, they kind of forget how to use the app, or they forget that they have to say that something should be private? Is that at all like a worry or consideration there?
It is, and so that's why we have the assisted journey. So when you set up your profile access, you set up either self-guided or assisted. And an assisted journey is set up differently than a self-guided. So in assisted journey, we might, for example, make all records automatically private between them and their doctors, right? And we might set in additional safeguards. That's one of the other reasons we're not selling it on a direct consumer basis right now, because we don't want someone having to make that value judgment about themselves, right? We wanna let someone who's qualified and taking care of them for the most part, right? Or can make that decision. That's why we're doing it that way.
Yeah. No, that's great. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Out of curiosity, where did the name Cogensus come from?
It's a name I made up.
Okay.
It's
Cool.
but it's actually but there's more to it. So it's actually made up of 3 Latin roots, and I was trying to think about what the tool would mean to me broadly. And so "co" is effectively collaborate, cohabitate, all these different "co" words, right? The root prefix for the most part means together, right? So together. Gen is effectively like Genesis or something new or life, like things like that. So together we live, right? And then sus is effectively it's sustainable sustenance, something it's something that generally nourishes you, whether physically or mentally. So effectively the tool is at a high level. It's, together we create something new that nourishes us. And so it's cogensis. And that's kind of
Fun.
how I
Did you study classics or something?
well, so no, I didn't, but I'm well read. So my background's a little bit interesting. So I actually came up in performing arts, and I did that for a long time. So I certainly respect the value of arts to humanity, right? I also spent a lot of my career in media. So working with media companies, I'm a big fan of humans tell stories to pass on our existence, right? We like stories of the beginning of time. And so that was one of the I should say that colored my perspective, right? And then for my educational component, I'm very humble. I went to a junior college. I wasn't an A+ student, we'll just say that. And then I went to a state school, and my undergrad was actually in human communications with a focus to interpersonal relations. Because when I was younger, I knew how to get up on stage and send a message out, right? But I felt that from a personal development perspective, I wanted to be able to better express myself in a call it a more interpersonal or a closer context, right? And so that has actually colored a lot of my journey forward because I mean, we live in a time where communication slammed at you every which way, right? Communication has become a heavily monetized and focused thing, right? Like you look at all the platforms today and it's not about necessarily an authentic dialogue in many cases. It's about slowly pushing you towards the outcome of whatever that is. It could be to buy something, it could be to think something, it could be to say something. I mean, they're all kind of we're driven by algorithms. And so I think it's important to have a tool that's kind of not built around an algorithmic push, right? Getting you to a certain part, but rather letting you feel like you're expressing what you want to express in a safe capacity. So that's how that all came about.
Yeah. Was there something specific that kind of sparked this idea?
Yeah, actually. So 2 things. One, I had a grandfather who passed away when I was 11, but I spent a lot of my childhood with him. So my parents used to go do martial arts, and they would leave me with my grandpa. And,
What martial arts they do?
they did kung fu,
Okay.
so
Okay.
for a long time. But so he took care of me when I was a little guy, right? Like, I spent a lot of time with that guy. And from 1 to 11, you don't really know somebody. He's your grandpa, right? That's the end of it. But in my late 20s, one day at random, saw something about his name or some similar name. I was like, I wonder what this guy was about. And I went back and I learned that he was like a war hero. He went off to World War II at like 17. He lied about his age. He got a Purple Heart. He got a Silver Star. He came back and committed suicide and then survived. And so, like, and I didn't know this, right? But as an adult, now I look back and I go, man, I bet that dude had stories. Like, really, just a crazy life, right? And I really wish I could know more, like, from his perspective, because it's different reading a couple sentences on a byline and going, "Oh, interesting, didn't know that," right? Versus knowing somebody, right? And that comes back to that interpersonal thing. And then the other part was, at the time, I was working at Accenture, and I was in this big global role, and so big consulting thing, right? Like, my job was helping big companies make more money. That's what it comes down to. And that doesn't always feel good. Like, it's just a you're making big companies make more money. And so then this AI wave came out, the generative AI wave, and everyone and their brother was like, "Oh my god, this is amazing." And so it is. Don't get me wrong, it's crazy. But like every other new technology, it's gonna go through its boom bust, right? We saw it with metaverse. We saw it with Bitcoin. We saw it with I mean, it just goes on and on and on, right? We saw it with the dot-com bust. Everything new comes up, it'll solve everything in the world, and then everyone goes, "You know what? It solves like this much, and it's great here, but all this other stuff is BS." And so I was seeing a lot of people going, "AI is gonna do this and this and this and this," right? And there's no downside to it. It's perfect. And I was like, "I don't think that is the case." And so I wanted to apply AI in a way that I felt personally good about. And I've also worked with the United Nations. So I've done some work with the United Nations around climate change standards and different things for technology. And so we live in an interconnected world, right? And there are certain problems that the world faces that not any one country has. Like aging, huge problem the world over, right? Broadly, every country's experiencing it some way worse than others. Asia's super bad. We're super bad. Europe's got spots that are super bad, right? So those are going to crush systems. So all that swirling together, I was sitting down at lunch one day and I thought, I think AI could help the elderly. And that's that idea. And then I thought about my grandpa and I was like, I wish I could have talked to him, right? And that all kind of swirled. And then I came up with this idea. So long story.
That's a good story, though.
Yeah.
That's a good story. Yeah. Do you think that if this was something that was there at the time where you were a kid with your grandpa would have used it?
I do actually. My grandpa was very much about like passing on lessons he thought were valuable in life to like, his kids or his grandkids. And I don't know many people in my extended family or even my family that had a bad opinion of him. So he was just generally a good dude. And I think everyone, truthfully, not just my grandpa, but I think everyone, as you get older, your perspective changes, right? And so everyone has something to offer from the perspective of this could help someone else, right? A lesson. The problem we have right now, broadly, is that a lot of those lessons are dominated, as I said, by algorithms, right? Just this is what it is. So certain messages get elevated, other ones don't. I mean, it just comes down to the flow of the data. And so I think it'd be really cool to have this be saved somewhere because if we don't, then we're going to lose huge swaths of human experience and we will forget things, right? And so I think that's a big negative for the human race broadly.
Yeah, and I mean, especially for you. I mean, I don't remember anything from when I was 10 or 9, so having those written down would be cool.
Yeah, I mean, again, my recollection pre what I read in my 20s was very limited. Like you, I don't really remember. I remember like 2 things, right? But that's it. And so I'm sure there's a lot more stuff that I would have appreciated.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, like, the timeline for Cogensus. Where is the product development at right now?
Yeah, so I mean, we're underway, right? We're building out our pilot and MVP. We are raising money right now for our seed round. It's been going very well. I mean, we have strong traction across the board, both from private individuals, potential long-term partners, as well as some VCs. And so we expect to close that up in February, in which case our goal is to actually release an early product to market around the August timeframe potentially. And we are also releasing it both in North America and South Korea.
Oh,
So
cool. Why South Korea?
So to my point, Asian countries have a huge problem with aging, right? They are overwhelmingly aging fast and their birth rates have declined rapidly. So they don't have the requisite people to care for them. South Korea in particular is one of the worst off. So they have a replacement rate of somewhere along, I think it's like 37%, meaning, only 37% of people are replacing themselves. And yet they have a huge block of people aging into elderly positions in life. And they also have a huge problem right now with people passing away without other people knowing. So it's not uncommon for someone to pass away and then someone finds them like 3 weeks later because they have that minimal of communication. So for us, knowing that we're a global company and we are tackling this problem worldwide, we're setting our base of operations here and there. And so we have a business over there ready to go. We have some more in talks. So we're actually raising our money both from North America and South Korea. So we
Nice.
want, yeah.
Yeah, totally. Would you guys at the beginning find individual doctors to partner with?
So we're partnering with business institutions that have doctors associated with them. So, in the States, we have a couple healthcare institutions, more like medical hospital type chains. We also have a few senior living facilities, assisted living, things like that, home care in some cases, states, governments that want to roll it out, right? And then in Korea, we have a large home health company that has in the thousands of users. So, and we're in talks with a couple healthcare associations over there as well.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I've always thought about in healthcare and in innovation is that a little bit of what prevents the innovation in healthcare is all the regulation associated with it, right? It's hard to get through all the regulation to actually sell a product out there. So, I mean, what is all the regulation behind all this, right? Are there a lot of roadblocks there?
So there could be, but there aren't for us for one particular reason. So we're releasing our MVP as an unregulated health and wellness app on purpose. We plan to go through, we'll call it FDA clearance for certain features in our version 2. So in version 1, we are not treating, diagnosing, solving, and there's a fourth term. We are specifically not doing any of those things, right? What we're doing is highlighting certain factors, right? So loneliness and social isolation, social connectedness, those are not regulated conditions, right? So we're going to solve Parkinson's. That's not what we're doing. Down the road in version 2 or 3, we plan to go down that path and say maybe potentially we now have enough data to make a claim that we can find depression, for example, or indicators of that. Even within our product right now, so we consulted a number of experts. One of my co-founders, she has 35 years in regulatory and clinical background in medical devices, healthcare, the whole nine, right? So when I started this company, I knew what I didn't know. And I'm a great entrepreneur. I'm a great executor. I'm a good technologist, and I'm a good vision setter, right? I can see all those things. But I'm not a medical expert, right, in the way that she is. And so very early on, we drafted her in to effectively, complete our team. We also have another individual on our leadership team who is a service disabled veteran and also worked with military intelligence, all kinds of stuff. He's ex-Amazon, ex-Accenture, just like myself. We want different viewpoints, right? Like different viewpoints, different perspectives. And then on our advisory board, we have clinicians who are beyond experts in their field. We have UCLA, we have a 10-time best-selling author who's a specialist on the elderly brain, so on and so forth. We have a lot of medical device talent. That's how we're avoiding those, what I would call missteps, right? We're very clear on what we want to do, and we're very clear on when we want to go down the regulated path. So,
Yeah, cool. So, given that this is not treating or diagnosing anything, you
mhm.
can actually bypass any regulation and sell it immediately to any hospitals?
Correct. And I don't want to say bypass regulation because it makes it sound like we're doing something wrong. We're just not regulating it to those specific things. So we think there's a lot of value in better defining and highlighting, these various social determinants of health, right? Which are, I believe, over time will make their way into what I'd call raw diagnostic of conditions, right? But we think that there's a lot of value in highlighting those factors now and then giving it to qualified medical professionals to make a decision with it, right? Because it's very unlikely for a general practitioner or a neurologist to know your social isolation status unless you bring it up, right? They're not going to ask those questions because it's not something in their core playbook right now. But it's data that's probably very relevant to them. And so that's why we're starting the way we are. And then over time, we may choose to go down what I'd call a predictive, regulated path. So,
Yeah. I mean, out of curiosity here in this business to business model,
mm,
how how will hospitals initially pay for the system? Is it like a subscription
yes.
basis?
So we sell our platform on a per seats basis with the seat being the elderly person or the core user, right? And so it's a SaaS model. So they pay every year an annual fee, right? And then they have these licenses that they can allocate to people, right? And then that's it right now. So over time, we're going to also look at insurance reimbursability. So we've had some early conversations with a couple insurance companies. There's a lot of interest actually because insurance companies are now very focused on social determinants of health. They've considered them and said these factors actually really could or might affect whether someone is going to develop this condition or, improve or decline. So they're starting to look at those things and there's a motion to better focus on those traits. And so that's why we feel we're going in the correct direction, not necessarily just from a business perspective, but rather from an evolution of how the medical community could ultimately view these things. So
Yeah. So from the hospital perspective, right? Because I mean, that's who you're selling it to. Like, what's the ROI for them? What should they expect that to be?
yeah, so I mean, one of the things we're doing when we release our pilot, so we have some pilots queued up for 2025. Those pilots are going to occur before we release what I'll call our generally available product, right? Our MVP. We are assessing for ROI in those pilots. We have some guesstimates on what those are, but we want to validate those from a data perspective before we even as a business make a claim on that front. We believe, our hypothesis, I should say, is that we will be able to potentially lower the time to a more accurate diagnosis, right, by giving them additional factors of consideration, or potentially give them time back from the perspective. Like, so for here's an instance, a senior care home or assisted living, right? Very common for a lonely resident to consistently call the nurse staff to engage with someone, right? That takes time away from them to go treat and help other patients in the facility, right? So if we can lower the amount of calls that that person's putting to that nurse, for example, we can give that business a better return on their time. We can also make the resident more comfortable, right? So that's one ROI that we hypothesize is possible, right? A better usage of clinician time. Secondarily, if we are better identifying these, loneliness factors that family members could potentially, we increase engagement, which actually might lower or more rapidly identify and highlight how someone's doing from a progression standpoint. Maybe they're getting worse way faster and they didn't know, right? So what we do is we prevent them from coming in at what a really serious intervention point to an earlier time when there's like, oh, there's something's not right. We should get you in now and do some work, right? But again, with all of what we're doing, you're going to validate these things through our pilots. So
Yeah. And I'm sure there's also the potential of improving the diagnosis that they're doing, right?
exactly,
The
like
end
they
of the
might not
day,
know.
yeah. At the end of the day, do you see this being something that the hospital can kind of provide as a service and then they get paid by their insurance companies for this service?
So eventually, in a very rapid fashion, as I mentioned, we are engaging with insurance with the hopes that eventually medical institutions will be able to reimburse it, right, for treatment. And so there are certain codes for some of the things we're looking at, but we're going down that path still. In
Yeah.
version one, the way we would extract, I would say, the ROI in a very simplistic way is we believe it will offer you these three benefits that will effectively help your system, your business system, operate more efficiently, and in turn, possibly provide better care for the residents, right? Which is ultimately what they would like to do, and better use of your resourcing. So we think that's the early, I won't call it promise, but potential, right? And so they could extract that from a numerical perspective and say, we're losing this much time for all these calls, right? And we're now only paying this for this, and it cuts this down by 25%. There's a very clear, relation there to why we should buy it.
Yeah. I mean, so since this is being sold to businesses
Mm.
and since the ROI is for those businesses, right? Why develop the patient part of it where they can keep their memories and their families can interact with that? Because I mean, when it comes to the business itself, they might not actually benefit from that. But is that more of something that will help keep those patients engaged with Cogensus so that they actually keep using it so that the hospital actually has the data to look at?
So there's two things about it. So one, it's of personal importance to me. One of the things I wanted to make a company that provided not just a business impact, but an actual altruistic impact to humanity. And I think there's a lot of value in that function for families specifically. Because one of the things that before I launched this company, I went out and I spoke with a lot of families who had someone in long-term care or had developed Alzheimer's and they were in a caregiver role, so on and so forth. And one of the things that really jumped out to me was they want to better connect with their aging relative, right? Or their relative in decline, but they can't now, right? And so it's really hard on them. And they wish they could have done it before. They wish there was a way for that person to be more comfortable and also kind of free up their time, right? So I think that function goes to that, right? Like we are not only are we providing a positive impact for family members to actually engage, but one of our core in our mission statement, one of our core things is using AI to extend social connection, right? So I believe personally that AI is very much like an unnamed tool, right? It's just a tool. You can posit it for good things, or you can posit it for bad things. Or I should say, not bad things, you could, but for consumptive use, right? I think I think we can do both. I think we can make it beneficial for a business, which will ultimately impact kind of the health economics equation, right, of this the system. But in proxy, we can bring value to the users of it in this system down here. And that's important, right? Because otherwise, what are we doing it for? Just to get rich, I guess. But
Yeah, no, no, totally. I mean, I actually I really like that because if you are serving the consumer being
mhm,
the patient is more excited
right.
about that product and their families are more excited about that product. And because of that, they're going to use that device more, which will probably give the hospitals way better data to use. Right.
Correct.
So yeah, no, that's really cool.
Yeah, I'll just leave on this before I'll end on that thought. I'll just say this, right? At the end of the day, one of the things that I think we're missing in a lot of places is we are being pushed further and further away from our tribe, right? Our individual tribe. And humans, for the most part, are communal creatures, right? And that's why, in my opinion, we're having such problems with loneliness and social isolation, both in younger people, mid-aged people, and elderly people, is because the current systems are designed to focus so deeply on you as an individual that your world becomes this big, right? And you can so easily forget that you might have these friends and loved ones around you, but you're just all in your own head, right? And it gets harder and harder the more busy you get and the older you get and all kinds of stuff, right? So if we don't try to bring us back to a more communicative tribe level, it's just going to get worse, right? And so I think AI has the real promise to make it worse if we don't create systems that make it better because AI is such a specific zone in thing for you. It removes your need to critically think. It removes your need to do all kinds of work, right? It relegates you to just a passive observer perspective and it serves you up all this stuff as opposed to kind of allowing you to be the driver of your destiny. 'Cause that's why.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I actually really like that. And the more I think about it, the more applicable I think it would be to say like my grandparents. My
Mhm.
grandpa, for example, swear to God, 10 times a day, he's just kind of spamming me on WhatsApp, a
Yep.
bunch of random stuff that's very hard for me to keep up with, right?
Mhm.
And even though I don't respond to it, I think that he feels good just venting off to me, you know? So if there was a tool that he could actually interact with a little better than I can interact with him, that might be something that he's actually really interested in.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we're bridging a communication gap in an interfamily unit.
Yeah. One question on the data itself, right? I mean, I know like data storage is a big thing. So what does that part of the business look like?
So we have everything stored in highly secure cloud environments. I'll just say that, right? So even though we're not going down the regulated path, we're building everything from the perspective that we expect to at some point for a later version offer certain features on a regulated path. So we're building things to be in compliance with HIPAA because we're going after South Korea. They have a standard called PIPA, which we're also being compliant with that, right? And as we grow the platform, as we go to different geographies, we will, of course, incorporate the standards, but they're mostly the same with some slight nuances on how you collect or manage the data. But suffice to say, I was in cybersecurity when I was younger. I've worked in big data systems for a long time, enterprise levels. So security is a big deal. Like we certainly recognize that. And so that's of paramount value to us.
Yeah. But does the business plan to, like, pay a data platform to hold on to that data? Or will you guys have your proprietary, like, data storage unit?
Oh, well, I mean, we're building it all in inter-application. So it's within our application, but it's all hosted in the cloud of stuff.
Got it. Got it. And then for the AI itself, are you guys kind of developing your own AI
Yeah,
model, or
we have a combination. So we are building some proprietary systems, and in other cases, we're using highly tuned off the shelf stuff. But I would say the highly tuned off the shelf stuff will bear little to no similarity to its consumer versions. I mean, the reality is, if you look at these major AI providers, Claude, OpenAI, different things, right? They've now released models that are effectively, we'll call it localized private trained models, where the data is, encapsulated within that model. You own it. They don't use it in their broader system. It's yours, right? And then if for some reason you don't want to do anything with it, you can offer to have it deleted. So none of the data that we're collecting will ever be exposed to, you know, public facing stuff. Right? We'll just say that in a nutshell. The other thing is I have a personal mission to not monetize that data for consumer gain. So we could at long term, we will have a lot of very sensitive data because this is people's personal feelings, thoughts. I mean, this is like as deep as you can go. I think the next thing you get is genomic data, but the genomic data doesn't tell you what you're thinking, right? And so it has to be handled in a very ethical way, and that's of huge importance to me, to the point where I've got a long process in mind to make sure that that never goes astray. We are treating it properly. We are never going to monetize it for consumer applications. We will never ever sell it to, like, I don't know. Let's say we get called from some major application that sells to seniors. They'll go, "Hey, will you sell this with?" We won't. That's not what we're doing. So
yeah. No, those systems are really cool. This summer, we had, like, a proprietary system through a partnership with OpenAI. It was just so cool to see all of that happening, and then at the same time to know that the data, like, I mean, ChatGPT, they couldn't see the actual data,
right.
which is really cool.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll say on this is, so our data fabric that we're using for both our storage and analytics is entirely proprietary to us. So that is one of our secret sauces, is this data fabric. It's super robust. So
Yeah.
that's why we feel confident, think with certain hypotheses.
Yeah, awesome. Matt, last thing on my end, are there competitors out there to this? Like, is there something similar that exists out there, and how is Cogensus different?
Sure. So there are a number of tangential competitors to what we're doing. But I say tangential because they might have one function of the three. There is no current platform from our research publicly available or within, you can only see so far into incubation, within startups.
Yeah.
We have not found one. So of all, I will tell you this, both from when we've approached institutions to, research institutions, financial institutions, medical institutions, the overwhelming feedback was, wow, this is really cool. Nobody thought of this. And I'm like, yeah, I know. So we are actually truly unique in that regard. That's why I feel very confident we'll do well.
Cool. Awesome. And I mean, you just mentioned the providers themselves, right? You mentioned earlier that there are a bunch of providers on the Cogensus team. What does the team look like right now?
So let me just be very clear on that. So we have medical professionals on our advisory board, right? On our leadership team, which encompasses my co-founder Raju Joshi. She is not a doctor, but she spent, the majority of career in regulated FDA clearance type environments, right? Is she guiding those efforts? And so we lean on those folks, right? Our team's actually quite small right now, but it's getting around, right? We have a very strong combination of technical, business, and medical expertise that will get us where we need to go. So we are actually going to be expanding the team at the close of this next round, both stateside and in South Korea. So
Fun. Exciting times. I'm sure it's busy, but
totally.
it sounds fun. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thank you, Matt. I don't know if you have Anything else that you would like to add?
Just thank you for the time today. It's been really nice speaking with you. I would just say that, if anyone's listening to our podcast, we are doing our seed round now. And if you are focused in that space, please contact me. We'll certainly have a discussion. We're also still building out our list of pilot entities. So, as I mentioned, we have a number already that have signed letters of interest in becoming either research partners or pilot customers for our version one. So, we're always looking for those. And we are supporting across the United States. So if someone hears this podcast or sees the video, right, and they have an interest in potentially learning more or joining us in our mission, we are very happy to have that discussion.
Yeah, no, I'm sure even here at Georgetown there might be some labs looking at similar things. So
Yeah, we'll
how did
keep
y'all reach out to them? Because
people in keep. So we have
yeah, oh yeah, right.
yeah, so our chief of staff, Hull Wang, is former Georgetown. And then actually we recently onboarded a PR specialist named Ava. And so Ava Schaffbook is her name. And so they're
Yeah.
great. I love Georgetown. We're very happy to appear here.
You know, because I could totally see how like research labs would love getting on this, to learn more about their patients through actual research.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll close on this for time purposes, but our future growth path for the company, we think there's a very real chance that we might get into data collection for potential clinical studies or research, right, to become a tool for them, because a lot of the data they get is intermittent and possibly unreliable, right? The data collection methods aren't as strong as they could be. And we, in a future version, have the opportunity to actually really tackle that market effectively and help them better understand both, how their participants are doing in a trial, both from how they're doing on a day-to-day basis, like is the medicine working, is it not working, or also just their thoughts and feelings more organically about how it's going. So there's potential there.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Matt.
Thank you, Gustavo. Been a real pleasure.
Yeah. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.